And what shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah, of David also, and Samuel, and of the prophets. This, of course, is in Hebrews 11, the Faith Hall of Fame. Who through faith, these men just listed now, through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection, and others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. So the Holy Spirit of God, who inspired this letter to the Hebrews, has a very, very high opinion of these people listed in verse 32. By God's grace, of course, we recognize that. They wandered in deserts, in mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth, and these all, having obtained a good report, that's God's view of them, they obtained a good report. Through faith, received not the promise. So I think it is interesting, I hope that you will agree with me that it is interesting that Samson is listed in the company of such unquestioned men as David and Samuel. The sad occasion in Samson's life, because there is a very sad occasion in his life, comes after Judges chapter 15, verse 20. If you'll turn back to that verse, where it seems that God makes a pronouncement at the conclusion of that part of Samson's life and ministry that God approved. One of the things that a guy my age comes to think about more and more and more is the importance of finishing well. Okay? Brian Spicer and I were talking about it the other day. You know, we're between third base and home. It's a little bit late in the game for us to decide to run the race with patience. We have either run it or not. What's crucial for someone like me, someone like Brian, someone like Archie, someone like Shirley, is that we finish well. Jim Dunn, finish well. We want to finish well, okay? And one of the great tragedies of Samson's life is that it appears as though that except for the final act, he did not finish well. Notice what Judges 15 verse 20 says about him. This pronouncement at the conclusion of that portion of his life and ministry that God approved of. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. But there's another entire chapter about him. It's almost like God says, I'm happy with him up to this point. Now, it would be nice if God said about me, when I died, I'm happy with him up to this point. And when Brian kicks the bucket, I'm happy with him to this point. And when Archie finishes, I'm happy with him at this point. But God said about Samson, I'm happy with him at this point, and then he lives several years more. Whoa. It is afterwards, after this comment, in Judges chapter 16, where are recorded the awful consequences of Samson's involvement with a woman named Delilah. You know, there's actually people that name their daughters Delilah. Why would anybody in his right mind name his daughter Delilah? Why would anybody name their daughter Jezebel? Okay? Wow, Delilah. Why don't you just nickname her Streetwalker or something like that? Delilah is about the worst possible name that any human being could ever give a little girl. Delilah? And yet people do that. I don't understand. It's, maybe it's not their fault. Maybe they're so profoundly ignorant of what the Bible says. Anyway, let's look at this interaction that Samson has with this woman named Delilah and the outcome of her repeated appeals that eventually led to Samson's great shame. Beginning chapter 16, verse 1, Then went Samson to Gaza, and saw there an harlot, and went in unto her. And it was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, In the morning when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts, and went away with them. You're talking about something that probably weighs a ton, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of the hill that is before Hebron. So he's carrying something around 2,000 pounds. And it came to pass that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and said unto her, Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee, every one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver. That's a lot of money. And Delilah said to Samson, Tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. And Samson said unto her, If they bind me with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak and be as another man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs, which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber. And she said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he brake the withs, as a thread of tow is broken when it toucheth the fire, so his strength was not known. So she tied him up in, weeds. She thought the weeds would bind him. And Delilah said unto Samson, Behold, thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If they bind me fast with new ropes that never were occupied, then shall I be weak and be as another man. Delilah therefore took new ropes and bound him therewith, and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And there were liers in wait, abiding in the chamber, and he brake them from off his arms like a thread. And Delilah said unto Samson, Hitherto thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If thou weavest the 7 locks of my... Ooh! Each iteration gets closer and closer to the source of his strength. If thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web. And she fastened it with a pin, and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he waked out of his sleep, and went away with the pin of the beam and with the web. And she said unto him, How canst thou say, I love thee? How can you say you love me? When thine heart is not with me. Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death, that he told her all his heart, and said unto her, There hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak, and be like any other man. And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, Come up this once, for he hath showed me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and brought money in their hand. And she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep, and said, I will go out as at other times, and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. But the Philistines took him, and put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza, and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, for they said, Our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, Our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. And it came to pass, when our hearts were merry, that they said, Call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between the pillars. And Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, Suffer me, that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there, and there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld while Samson made sport. They were laughing at him, mocking him, ridiculing him, teasing him, humiliating him. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up, of the one with his right hand, and of the other with his left. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might. And the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down, and took him, and brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the burying place of Manoah his father. And he judged Israel 20 years. Notice, at the end of all of this, he still judged Israel only 20 years. So everything that took place in chapter 16, he still judged Israel only 20 years. I want you to notice, as I've already reminded you, but take a look in your Bible, Judges 15:20 and 16:31, where Samson is paid tribute for judging Israel 20 years. So apparently, God does not take into account for the record of his accomplishments the time spent with Delilah and him succumbing to her enticements. It's recorded, but it's not approved by God at all. For though Delilah did over time succeed in her illegitimate appeals to Samson for information about the source of his strength, you know, the reality is she could have done nothing had he behaved wisely. She could have done nothing. You say, well, so whose fault is it, Pastor? Oh, ultimately, it's completely and totally his. Okay? Completely and totally his. Now let's look at the place that she occupies in his life. What was the essence of her wicked strategy? A type of subterfuge that has been used again and again and again by women seeking to undermine the men that they are manipulating. I had an opportunity to grow up and observe this. Not with my mother. My mother was terrible in her ability to deal with my dad. She didn't know how to deal with him at all. She was, I think, an early on feminist who was as blind as a bat when it came to dealing with a guy who had a strong personality. The woman that I had the opportunity of observing at a distance was my mother's older sister. My mother's older sister was a stunningly beautiful extraordinarily intelligent woman who for most of her life hated being a woman because she felt like she was held back from doing all of the things that she was smart enough to do, because in comparison to all of the men she had known her whole life, they were idiots in comparison to her. And she was an extremely bright woman. And so what my very, very, very bright and extremely attractive aunt did, she resorted to the oldest profession in the world and spent most of her adult life manipulating every guy she came across. And the first guy was a man older than her dad, older than my grandfather. And he was a very, very wealthy guy, and she got it all. Then after that, I don't know why she didn't go to Hollywood. 'Cause she was at least as beautiful as Gloria Swanson and those types. And probably smarter, maybe not as smart as Hedy Lamarr, but smarter than most of them. Anybody know about Hedy Lamarr? The Austrian actress? She was the one that invented an electronic device for radio-controlled torpedoes that made use of frequency hopping so that no one could jam the signal and keep the torpedo from being controlled. So you have the sending unit and the receiving unit on a pre-programmed frequency hop. You could control it, and even if you were able to jam one band of signal, it would hop around and reacquire. And she designed that and patented it like in 1943. Smart woman. But my aunt was a very, very bright woman. So what she did was she would ply her trade around Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri. She would go into a county. Now, back in those days, of course, and it made it possible, the Bonnie and Clyde types, because jurisdictions did not extend across state lines unless it was a hot pursuit. Okay. So until they made it a federal crime, you could rob a bank in Texas, and if you stepped across the Oklahoma line, the Texas police couldn't do anything to you. I'm in Oklahoma now. And you could buy liquor in Oklahoma and step across into Texas, and they couldn't come after you until they federalized so many of the laws. So what she would do is she would go into a county and she would target the county sheriff. And she would compromise him, the way Delilah compromised Samson. Well, once she compromised him, she could do anything she wanted until enough of the women of the county got outraged over the conduct of their husbands that they basically ran her out of town on a rail. And she could spend a year in a county making money all day, every day, and late into the night. And she did that for decade after decade after decade. So she knew how to manipulate, and that's the kind of woman that we see here. The wicked strategy, this subterfuge that was used not just by Delilah, but by women over the years, manipulating men. Recognize that Delilah, it's a stretch to call what she's doing an appeal, because it bears little resemblance to what the Bible describes as a legitimate appeal, because Delilah does not have a right standing with Samson. How could she? She's a whore, okay? She's a slut. She's a woman who's been with so many guys, she probably lost count of them before she turned 18. Neither does she have a right basis for her many appeals. Her timing is always wrong. Her information is never true. Her attitude is always deceitful. And her words are manipulative lies. And of course, her response can't be correct. Every time he, in his own way, refused to provide her the information, she had a temper tantrum. And eventually, you don't love me, you don't love me. Delilah is obviously not appealing. She is actually very obviously seeking not to persuade him to make a new decision based upon new information. No, she is working to change his mind. She is not introducing any new information to this equation at all. She wants what she wants, what she wants, what she wants. We know that her motive is money. We know that her design is his destruction. So she's not establishing his position, but undermining him. So as you read through this chapter, again, maybe when you get home, you'll notice the progression as Delilah asked him. She didn't get what she wanted. Then she asked him again. She didn't get what she wanted. And she asked him again, and she didn't get what she wanted. And she asked him again. And the result was she wore down the strongest man in the world. She wore him down to the point of giving away his valuable, life-preserving secret, okay? I submit to you that this is the real issue. When a woman, any woman, for any reason, asks, doesn't get what she wants, she asks again. She has now gone Delilah mode. She has now gone Delilah mode. She asks once, doesn't get what she wants, she asks again. 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 How is she different from Delilah? She's not. She's not. And we see this wearing down process with him, and she's using every ploy in the book. Does this not show the tremendous power of persistent appeal, persistent, dogged, determined effort to wear down another person's resistance? And does this not also show what happens when someone in authority, and this is his fault, he allows an appeal to degenerate into a battle of wills? Whether it's a boss with an employee, a husband with a wife, parents with children, you never allow it to degrade into a contest of wills. Once you allow it to degrade into a contest of wills, you lose, because in almost every situation that I have ever observed, the person who wants it has a stronger will than the person who decides. And so as soon as you allow the person to come back at you again, it's over. It's just a matter of time. How many of you remember the airport story? I'll tell you once again. Back before 9/11, my wife and daughter and I were flying out of Portland International Airport to come back to the Los Angeles area. And that was when people, family, friends, stuff could go right up to the boarding gate with you and sit there and be bored with you. And there was, I'm sitting here, and sitting across from me is a very sophisticated woman. And this is 35 years ago, so 30 years ago. So I'm guessing the woman was probably 60, very, very sophisticated in her attire, not very tall, skinny as a rail, smoking, of course, Virginia Slims. I mean, she was a deep lung inhaler, man. It took three or four exhalations, and the smoke is still coming out of those skinny little lungs of hers. And there's my wife sitting here, she's sitting here, and over here is a really big guy. Guy's probably 6'3", 6'4". And his wife, and they have a little girl, looks to be about 4 years old, maybe 5. And I remember that she was wearing socks and then sandals over her socks. Because the argument was, we're standing there and the weather was a little bit chilly in the terminal, and she was asking her dad. He had a rolled up newspaper, and he's talking to apparently his mom, who's getting on the same plane we are, and the little girl says, "I want to take my socks off." And his wife says nothing. He looks over and says, "Honey, no, it's too cold." "I want to take my socks off." "I want to take my socks off." He says, "No, honey, it's too cold." "I want to take my socks off." And she goes on and on and on and on and on. And finally the guy leans over and said, "No, the answer is no." And he reaches down with his rolled up newspaper and just, I said, "Stop it." Tap. He didn't hurt her. He should have hurt her. He should have inflicted pain. He did not. He dared to touch her with the newspaper. She went crazy with rage. She was mad. It was, "How dare you touch me?" Screaming and yelling and screaming and yelling and screaming and yelling. "I want to take my socks off. I want to take my socks off." And finally he just, "Okay, take your socks off." I'm sitting there. I don't like this one bit. And I'm looking at this clown. Daggers. Yeah. What an insult to manhood everywhere. My goodness, this guy. What a gutless wonder. And a terrible father. Not to mention a mousy husband. I mean, I felt like walking up and ripping his shoulder boards off and breaking his sword. He had no shoulder boards and he had no sword, so I couldn't do it. Besides, he's about this much bigger than me, so I didn't. But I'm looking at him, and I looked over to the woman who was sitting across from me, and she takes a drag on her Virginia Slims. She looks at me. "Was there ever any doubt?" She realized the outcome was dictated by the fact that the father was allowing the child to do that. As soon as you allow your child to continue doing that, the outcome is predetermined. Incredible. Children always have stronger wills than their parents. And when parents get into a headbutting contest with their kids, they're going to lose. That's the reason why a wise father doesn't get into a headbutting contest with his kids. Okay? A wise mother doesn't get into a headbutting contest with her kids. Typically, you'll see parents, they'll tell them, and then they'll tell them, and then they'll tell them, and then they'll start telling him, and then they'll shriek at them, and then the kid will do it because he knows, I don't have to do what my mom tells me to do. I do not have to do what my mom tells me to do. I have to respond to the level of shriek. And when she gets to this level of shriek, I know I have to do something. And so that kind of a mom is a mother that trains her children to disobey her. Empty the trash. I said empty the trash. I said empty the trash. I said, I'm not going to tell you again, empty the trash. Do you hear me? I said empty the trash. And if on the 5th time the kid empties the trash, the mom foolishly thinks, well, I've trained my child to empty the trash. Oh, no. You've trained your child to disobey, 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 and then obey. You have trained your child to disobey. Samson was actually encouraging Delilah to continue what she was doing by not putting it to an end. Now, if he had been a wiser man, what would he have done to prevent this tragedy? What might parents do to prevent their children from wearing them down in this way? What comments do you have regarding a wife who appeals to her husband but will not accept his decision? He makes a decision, she comes at him again. He makes a decision, she comes at him again. He makes a decision, she comes at him again. And she keeps coming at him until he makes the decision she approves of. Now tell me, who is the head of that household? Pretty obvious, right? Pretty obvious. Now, what is most despicable to me, and excuse me, but I get emotional about this kind of stuff. I'm just, I have a personality that lights up over this kind of stuff, okay? When I'm walking through the mall, which is not very often, I get enraged when I see parents letting their children do this to them, okay? I don't get mad. I never get mad at the kids. They don't know any better. They do what they get away with. It's the parents who let them, okay? So what's the most despicable to me is the introduction by Delilah of the technique, and it was, I think, the third round of her efforts. She uses the technique of questioning his love for her. If you really loved me, okay? Notice what she says in verse 15 of Judges chapter 16. How canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Really? Really? I don't make the decision that you think I ought to make, and you don't like it, so you question my love for you. Really? Really? I don't think it gets any lower than that. To me, that is the ultimate spousal betrayal. Okay? Second only to perhaps adultery. Okay? When someone challenges you by insisting that you don't really love someone if you don't do what they want you to do, even when it is not in your best interest to do what they want you to do. I'm so glad. I think my wife and I, we've been married, 87 years, was it? 42 years, coming up on 42 years. I don't think she's ever pulled that nonsense on me one time. If you loved me, you'd do what I want. No, she has never, no, number one, it wouldn't work with me. Okay, it wouldn't work. Okay. That said, when emotions and romance are involved, especially with someone who's nasty, and Delilah, she's nasty. She's just a nasty woman. Any woman who brings up, well, if you don't do this for me, you don't love me. Any woman who does that is nasty. She's just nasty. She's nasty. There is a way for couples to disagree. There is a way for couples to argue. There's a way for couples to fight. They need to learn how to fight without doing permanent damage, without gutting each other, without saying words that can never be forgotten. Okay? Is there anything wrong with a husband disagreeing with his wife or a wife disagreeing with her husband? There's nothing wrong with that at all. I'm of the opinion that kids need to see those honest disagreements taking place. They need one of the advantages that kids that are raised in intact homes have over kids raised in single parent homes is they get to observe, unless their parents are really not very wise, they get to observe the resolution of conflict. It is important for children to observe the resolution of conflict. You say, well, I disagree. Okay. We can agree to disagree, and that's an appropriate resolution of conflict right there. That kids that grow up in a single home, they never get to see that. Studies have shown that kids that grow up in single-parent homes have profoundly unrealistic expectations of the process that takes place between husbands and wives disagreeing. And verbally interacting with each other. Well, I disagree. I don't think that's the wise decision. And can a wife disagree with her husband without undermining him? Oh, of course she can. Should she disagree with her husband if she thinks that he has made an unscriptural or unwise decision? Of course she should. Yes, she should. And depending on the situation, she ought to engage in that disagreement in front of the children. You say, Pastor, that's wrong. Actually, no, it's not. You actually think it's better to fight in the bedroom? The bedroom is not a place for fighting, in case you didn't know. In case you didn't know. It's not a place for arguing, okay? And if it's done respectfully and done appropriately, children can learn and can acquire wisdom for how to differ with someone that you love and admire and respect, but don't agree with. That happens. And it happens more frequently than a lot of people are willing to admit. So do you pretend like you don't agree? Do you pretend like is a wife supposed to pretend to her children that she's a Stepford wife? Yes, dear, whatever you say, dear. Whatever you want, dear. Pork chops at 6 p.m., dear. Is that okay? No. That's not God's will for any wife to behave like that, okay? So she brings in the issue of, well, if you really loved me. And the result is found in verse 16, chapter 16, verse 16. The Bible says, his soul was vexed unto death. I mean, she really had him knotted up here. Okay. And so what was the result of allowing a situation that he should have never been in, that he should have shut down, but he allowed it to keep going and keep going and keep going, and then she pulled the love card, you don't love me. She had him all knotted up in his guts. His soul was vexed unto death. So what did he do? He caved. He caved. And he told her. And of course she betrayed him for lots of money. Okay? And of course the rest is history. I mean, utterly predictable. Right? Now, what are some of the lessons for us to learn? I think they are not related to the fact that Delilah was a slut, a woman of ill repute, a prostitute. We already know that, but that's not really the germane issue here. The lessons for us to learn are, number one, that Samson should not have allowed her to wear him down. You say, well, how do you deal with that? Your son approaches you, actually a daughter. I have experience with a daughter, okay? Your daughter approaches you and asks you, makes an appeal, and you, no, I don't think so. And then she comes back at you, stop right there. You're not trying to get me to change my mind, are you? Because you wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want to try to do that. Not with me. Got it? You just end it right there. You just end it. Because if you don't end it, what's going to happen? It becomes a contest of wills. And the person who wants more than the person who decides. And the person who wants begins to undermine and begins to dishonor and begins to undercut, because the person who wants is fixated upon, I want what I want, no matter what. And it's up to you, whoever you are, boss, husband, mother or father, whoever, to not let that process take place. Oh no, oh no, oh no, no, I've decided. You're not trying to get me to change my mind, are you? Because that would be a far worse mistake than your original request. Got it? Let's keep it nice. I mean, nobody has to yell. Nobody has to get mad. There doesn't need to be any arguing, because you simply don't allow it to go further. You say, well, what if the person feels like I just can't talk to him? Then what you do is, as part of your training, you teach the person how to make an effective appeal. I like being appealed to. I mean, I really, I love it when my daughter appeals to me. I love it. I look forward to it because I enjoy giving her what she asks that is good for me and good for her. I love doing that. And frequently she will ask, and I will give her way more than what she's asked for because I love doing that. But to try to get me to change my mind once I've made up my mind, oh no, oh no, 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 no. So that's the first thing. Samson should not have allowed her to wear him down. He should have told her, in a nice way, knock it off. We're not going to discuss this anymore. It's not going to happen. You say, well, what happens if she has a temper tantrum? Get in the car and go for a drive. I remember counseling with a guy years ago. And his wife she would howl like a banshee when she didn't get her way. And I'm telling you, she was withering in her verbal assault against him. Oh my goodness, she castigated him. And whew, I mean, it was like a blowtorch coming out of her mouth. And I remember telling him, I said, that's your fault. What do you mean it's my fault? I said, you sit there and let her talk to you that way? What do you expect me to do? I expect you to go for a drive. What is she going to do? Chase you? Those of you who know who I'm talking about know that's not possible. Okay. I said, she hits you like a blowtorch, get in your car and go for a drive. Come back in an hour. And if you walk in the door and she does it again, turn around, go right back out. And keep doing that until she knocks it off. You do not have to argue with her. You do not need to ever raise your voice. You do not need to fuss with her. But neither do you need to put up with that kind of trash. Just get in your car and drive away. Come over to my house. Okay? Simple. There are things that people do to some people. Can I just be real with you? There are things that people do to some people that they've never done to me. They've just never done it. I bet you beans to buckshot that some of the things that people do to some people, they've never done to Pete Hilly. Bet you they've never done it to him one time. I'll bet you by the same token that the kind of things that people do to some people, I bet you they don't do to Mike. And there's other you guys here now that people just don't do that to you. You know why? Because they know you well enough to know that I'm not going to get anywhere doing that with him. You just, and I'm not saying you're going to yell at him. I'm not saying that you're going to threaten him or do it. You just, that doesn't work with you. People do to you what they expect to work with you. So basically, when people treat you nasty, it's because you've trained them to treat you nasty. They expect results from being nasty with you. That's your fault. That's your fault. Maybe not every time, but most of the time. So that's number one. Okay. He should never have been with this woman in the first place. A guy should run from a woman who tries to manipulate him in this way. Okay. The next lesson is Delilah's approach of persistently trying to wear Samson down, challenging his love for her, and all the other manipulative nonsense that accompanies an illegitimate appeal. I mean, and it's not only women who do it. I mean, there's guys that do it all the time. This is not gender specific, okay? Although if a guy walked up to me and said, if I don't give him the answer once you don't love me, I'd say, hey, you got that one right. Okay? All right? I don't think that anyone should ever employ such methods to get their way. I don't think a woman should ever employ such methods to get her way with her man, since it is This is what I think feminism has robbed women of today. It is a man's destruction for his woman to do this and succeed in doing it. She's destroying him if what she's attempting works. She is dismembering him emotionally, psychologically, if you will. She's taken him apart. And I don't think that a woman who loves her man should even try something that she knows is very dangerous for him spiritually. It's spiritually destructive to him. So she shouldn't even go there. Now, if a woman doesn't know any better, fine. Then she needs to learn. Or a guy, fine. He needs to learn. But to use this Delilah approach with someone is damaging to them. And so I think as an option, it should never be employed. Better for a woman to not get what she wants than to get what she wants from her husband, and now he is damaged. And damaged by her. And damaged by her in a way that will not be good for her in the future. And as I said, it's not just women. It's, bosses and workers, parents and children, that kind of thing. Okay. And sadly, I've seen children harm their parents, damage their parents psychologically by the lengths to which they will go to get their way. Guilt tripping their parents, guilt motivating them, shaming them, accusing them. I'm going to say, honey, we just can't do that right now. Financially, we just can't do that. Yeah, well, if you were a better dad, you'd make more money. Really? Thanks, honey. Praise God, my daughter has never done that. So, does anybody have a question over Delilah's appeal to Samson? It's pretty low.